Hello, my name is Rick Stroot, and in this presentation I will take you through the capabilities of Application Lifecycle Management by a presentation and a short demo. I'm part of InnoFour. InnoFour is a Siemens Digital Industries and Siemens EDA channel partner. We're active in the Benelux and Scandinavia with 15 people. We're headquartered in Almelo in the Netherlands, but we also have people locally in Sweden, in Stockholm and Lund, Norway and Denmark. Our focus is electronic design automation. So any companies that develop electronics, we provide tools and methodologies ranging from electronic design automation tools to application lifecycle management and PLM tools. When we talk about application lifecycle management, then we're talking about Polarion. Polarion was a company founded back in 2004. With after a year, they had their first 100% browser-based ALM environment on the market. And in 2016, it was acquired by Siemens to complete their integrated ALM PLM solution. Since then, Polarion has reached a lot of users, 2.5 million plus users worldwide, including 250 plus of the Fortune 1000 companies worldwide. And it contains a lot of extensions and a very dedicated group of community members. So when we look at Polarion, we see that it's used in many different industries. The ones that obviously are stand out are the more regulated industries like aerospace and defense, automotive transportation, and medical life science. But we also see Polarion in other industries like semiconductor, machinery, energy, and financial. So you might recognize some of the names on this slide. Companies you work with or companies that you know. So Polarion basically offers ability to do projects, and these projects could select a certain methodology, being a V-model type of methodology, an agile type of methodology, waterfall, hybrid, or another type. So you see that Polarion is capable of doing different forms of methodologies that you would like to use in your organization, and you can use those side by side. So you can do one project in V-model and the other one in agile. It gives you the ability to do application lifecycle management containing requirement management, quality assurance, defect management, task management, changes, planning, focusing on functional safety, allowing you to create traceability. But if you already have tools in your organization that do part of this, like you using some model-based design tools like Enterprise Architect or Simulink, or you're using certain tools that do quality assurance like VectorCast, Clockwork, or actually in the implementation side, Jira, Git, Jenkins, etc. We can seamlessly work with these tools together. So we can easily integrate with these tools if you already have them in-house. So before we dive into the actual demo, let me first explain a little bit about the Polarion functionality and basically the architecture. The functionality of Polarion ranges from requirement management, creating your requirement specifications, doing review and approvals, traceabilities, to QA, where you create your test cases, you then combine them into what we call test runs, you execute your tests, do some test planning, automate these tests, and do some issue tracking. But in addition to that, Polarion captures all the changes that you're making, doing impact analysis, versioning, revisioning of any action that you're doing within Polarion. And while doing that, you also would like to do some project management, and that's also built in, like releases and iterations that you can plan. You can assign certain requirements or some work packages to these releases, and you can also track your resources and your time. Built into the tool, we have basic functionality to do variant management. If you want to take that to the next level, we also have an additional plugin called Variant Management that allows you to create a 150% master specification, and together with a set of features, a feature model, you can create specific variant-specific specifications that only contains the requirements or test cases for that dedicated variant. And this can be automatically generated or updated. I already talked that Polarion can connect to many different tools within your organization. However, if you're missing a connector or if you're missing an interface, we also have dedicated interfaces that can be added to Polarion. So Polarion is based upon a number of artifacts, three main artifacts. The first one, the most basic one, is the work item. A work item is basically your definition of either a requirement, a test case, or any other object. And it contains your text in terms of your title, your description. It contains the status, the workflow status in the form of a status field, but it also contains the owner, assignee, severity, target versions, etc. There are also some additional fields that can be used to, for example, communicate across colleagues using commenting fields and resolutions, etc. And there's even an approval section that allows you to assign people to approve the requirement before you're moving to the next stage. Not only requirements are a work item, but also all the other items within Polarion are called work items. And depending on the type, like a test case, they have different fields. A test case, for example, has test steps or a resolution, which are not fields that you will find back on your requirement. And these work items can be customized. So you could create your own types of work items. You could add fields to them in any form you want. The work items could be, well, floating into a project, or you could combine them into what we call a LiveDoc. A LiveDoc is basically your mechanism into the tool. So this is where you collect a set of work items to become a requirement specification or a test specification. And these items can then be shown in different ways. You can either show the title, you can only show the description, or both. You can add some fields to the document so they give some more metadata to that information. And you can simply write them as you would write a requirement specification in Word. Simply starting to write, and by doing that, creating all the requirements or all the work items as you go. In addition, these LiveDocs also contain plain text and headers, etc. So all of that is bundled into one live document. The last artifact is what we call a live report. So if LiveDocs are the way in, live reports are the way out. So basically, it's your view into the data that's in there. You can use a live report to show the dashboard of your project, where you are, what's your progress, what's your planning in terms of where are each of the work items in the process. You could create a traceability matrix, you could create impact analysis. Actually, I say create, but you can also use those because they're already pre-configured in the project template examples. These live reports again are customizable. So you simply select one of them, customize them to your need, or create a new one by you get a framework and you can simply drag and drop certain widgets into the areas, configure them to your needs, like a pie chart or a table, and then put some configuration on there. I will show that also later on in the demonstration. So the demonstration will be done based on a V model, and in this case, an automotive example of a requirement specification. Within that V model template, we have on the highest level a system requirement, defining the system requirements. But on top of that, we actually have imported and I've made an example of that, imported a regulation spec coming from the automotive industry. And what you can do while importing those regulation specs, you can automatically have sections marked that become a standard requirement and then link them to the system requirements. So you can show traceability all the way down to your standard in the applicable or the applicable standard in your industry. When we then go a little bit lower to the actual implementation level, we see that we define it to different domains, like a software requirement. You could refine it into a hardware requirement or an electronic requirement. So any levels can be created there. And if we want to do some risk assessment, there's a risk work item that can do risk assessment on both the system requirement as well as on the software requirement. Going more into the architecture, we bundle different implementation tasks into work packages that are then assigned to a certain software requirement. So it basically implements the software requirement. And these work packages are then targeted to a specific release. On the right side of the V model, we obviously want to do some verification and validation. So we have test cases on each of the levels that are basically there specifically to test that level. So a system test case on the system requirement level, a software test case to do manual testing of software requirements, and a unit test case to do automatic testing of software requirements, and a regular test case to do the work packages. Again, you could also have one single test case that can be used to verify all the requirements, or you could have even multiple items. This is something, again, this structure is something you can customize. However, what I'm showing here is also an out-of-the-box example template that's coming with Polarion that you can quickly reuse. When these tests fail, they automatically trigger an issue. And these issues can then be, well, resolved by either updating your requirements, creating a change request, or basically changing the test case if it's there where default is. So what we're going to look in the first part of the demo is on the left side of the V model, looking into the requirement definition. Before we're going to actually look at the design, let's first look at the GUI of Polarion. On the left side, we see our navigator, and within our navigator, we actually see a section above this light blue line and a section below. The section below is always there in any project. So what we see is our work items, recognize the work items that we briefly covered in the previous slide, our documents and pages, and each of these contain folders or spaces as we call them, and within these spaces we see some specifications, in this case some LiveDocs, blue icons, and some live reports, some green icons. In addition, I can expand the section here to also show some additional information, such as our plans or test runs or whatsoever. Now, the section above this blue line basically are shortcuts to each of the sections within your project. So in this case, each of the phases within your project, which coincidentally also match to the different spaces or folders within the documents and pages, obviously. Now, within this project, I've created actually a smart map to navigate through the design and to navigate through the V model. So let's start with the standard requirements. The standard requirements are basically a document that comes from the automotive industry containing the regulation for performance and safety of standard of motor vehicle parts. And this is a standard that I've imported, but I've not imported it into the project because that means you need to do it for every project. I actually done that into what we call a document library. So we have a central document library where we can store these standards, and from here I could then say I open that one and I actually do a reuse into my project, or as I shown already here, I can quickly do it from here, this navigation item. Create one into your project, and then within that project I can open that same document and I can mark sections in that document that are applicable. Now in the middle we see actually of the user interface, we see what we're working on, our document. And on the right we see a panel that can be customized or can be changed to whatever you want to see. So in this case I would like to switch to what we call work item properties, which shows me the properties for the selected work item in this document. Here you see the example of a LiveDoc where you see a small header, the title, a small intellectual part within the document that shows the approved status of this document, and then a table of applicable standards. For any given project, it could be that not all standards that are coming with the standards in our industry are applicable. So what you can do here is you can mark each of them to be applicable. And as soon as you do so, they will also show up in this applicable standard table. So if I save this, you will see that Article 1 now has been added to this table. So you always see within this document, and there's only a few that I've selected here, are applicable for this specific project. Now, what can I do with these standards? I can then link them or link them to the appropriate system requirements, for example. And with that, prove that I actually have delivered traceability all the way down to my standards. I will show that later on in its traceability report. Now the next step is, let's go back to the Home tab here, is our system requirements. Our system requirements come from a space, and this space has its own report or dashboard where it shows what is the status. So this report will show me a workflow on how to go through this through this phase, starting, for example, with the project scope, then from a project scope create a feasibility study, and then I could either import or create a document with system requirements. Now, in my case, I've already taken a system requirement document and I've imported that into Polarion. This document is basically here on the left side. It's a Word document that doesn't have any markings at all of where requirements are defined. There's a section 3 where we have the requirements, and these requirements are in the form of DrivePilot should easily engage operations or DrivePilot must not engage. So we see some wording there that hints to this as being a requirement specification, and these are requirements. So I can import it into Polarion, and while doing that, automatically recognize each of the individual items to be requirements. Here we have the same document. Again, I've enhanced this with a little bit of intelligence here on the top, showing me the status of the document and the version and who has approved it, a table of content, but the rest is exactly the same. Although the format might be slightly different, I will get back to that in a minute. The items here are the same and they're marked as requirements. And how does it do that? Well, it recognizes things like should, must, and by that mark them as requirements. And there's many different ways you can do this in the import mechanism. And once you have played around with that and got to a proper configuration, you can reuse that for other projects as well. So the way how I've imported this document is fully automated. And this is something by the GUI, you can basically set the parameters on how to import it. So you see it's a requirement specification of a DrivePilot for in the automotive industry. We also see the enhancements within the document of showing some fields that are actually part of the requirement, like severity, status, maybe valid date or whatever. And I can enable or disable certain of these fields to be shown within the document. So you see that we have a requirement specification in this case, which is imported, but it's not static. So what I could do is I could start to create additional requirements here. I could simply say enter and say, well, before any user must engage DrivePilot on a public road, that user must successfully complete a tutorial. A tutorial must be created for this purpose. Create a tutorial that follows this flow. And I can add some mathematical formula or some table of contents or some other thing, or for example a diagram. Well, let's say first a question mark, new user, connect these two, run tutorial. And I insert this in my requirement. So you see I can add pictures, I can add diagrams, I can add all kinds of information into my requirements. For those of you who are sharp, you also see that the ID of this requirement still is 1. And if I continue, it will be 2 for the next, etc. Once I save, then it gets its unique ID. And these unique IDs are based upon a short abbreviation or tracker prefix, as we call them, marking the project, and a unique number. This ID also means that you can link items within the project or cross projects as long as the ID is the one that's always there. So the ID is basically the marker that makes it unique and makes it unique within the entire Polarion environment. And with this, you can link things across projects. So as soon as I save this, it gets its own ID. And you see that the order of these IDs are not in line, and that's because I've created this one much later as the other ones. If I do want to add some information in terms of order into my project, I can do that. I can simply configure my settings in such a way that besides ID, I also would like to see the outline number. And the outline number I would like to place before the ID. So we have the ID here as the second one, and the first one is the outline number. And I have the severity, the verb, the status, and the valid date. And actually I would like to see that in a slightly different form. I would like to show it in a table view. So let's set that and look at the thing again. Now we see that these get an outline number. Outline number based upon in what chapter they are. And if I even want to prefix that, I can do that by going to the document properties and give it a prefix. Let's say RAQ, and they get an RAQ prefix. So rec 4.1.1 within this document, not unique across the project, and the ID is PD517. So you see you can actually add some additional information, and at the end, now instead of showing the different properties here on the right side, it shows the properties in a table neatly underneath the work item. Now we can view, you can edit these requirements, we can edit these documents in a way as I've done it here. Let's save this, or I can actually go to the requirement itself, to the work item itself. And that's a slightly different view, but it's the same data. If I'm going to change something here, it changes in the document, and vice versa. It's just a different view of the same object. So basically what I see here is, again, a tutorial must be created for this purpose. It's linked to a parent requirement in the document because I did an indent. It has some custom fields, some commands, some approvals, and some diagrams that I've added, which is this diagram. So you see there's different ways to get to the same data depending on the type of engineer that you are. Now, if we go back to our document, and we would like to see, once our document is ready, we would like to take this document through what we call the workflow. Now, we can do that for each individual work item, but that would be a lot of work. In this case, what I'm chosen is to go with the document through the workflow. So I take the document, and I'm now in the document properties here, which are the properties of the entire document, and I basically take it to the next status, send to review. And when I do that, I can no longer make any edits to it because it's in review. What I can do, however, is I can request people to review each of the items and give their signature. And we can do that on the full document, or we can choose to use what we call the approval mechanism to ask people to approve each individual item, or ask specific people to approve certain items, review certain items. So for example, I left out this one or as a new one, I'm going to approve that one as well. It could also be that I'm not responsible for all of these, but partially, so I only need to approve some of these. So multiple people can be requested to approve the work items. Once that's done, then I could go to what we call the signature state. But before doing that, let's go back to this document properties, and let's see what I can do now. I can move it back to rework. I can reject it, but I cannot not yet move it to mark reviewed. Why not? Because it requires a signature. And this signature is basically necessary to move it. It's a condition to move it to the next stage. So let's go to the signatures. And let's say mark reviewed. And I can invite people. I can automatically have people invited depending on the workflow settings. If someone with a given role within a project and the document is in a certain state, they need to automatically get an invitation by email to sign off this document, to review and to sign off the document. Now, we don't have anyone invited, which means at least someone needs to sign, which means I can sign at this moment. It's not officially the what we call 4i principle, because the one who's creating the document should not be the one signing it, but anyway. So Rick has signed, reviewed actually. And since I logged in as system administrator, it does require me to put in my signature or to put in my electronic signature, which is fully FDA Part 11 compliant. And I'm doing that by basically logging in as administrator. There we are. Now Rick has reviewed, and if I look up in the document, I can also see in the top level table that there is actually a signature Rick has reviewed. Now I can go back to my document properties, and now I can actually move it to the next stage. And when I do that, it also takes all the work items to the next stage. So as soon as I save this, then also the workflow for each of the work items is reviewed in this case. Now, if I want to look back what has happened, who has done what, etc., I can look to the document history. So I can open up the document history and I can see the different versions, revisions. I can even baseline certain revision to give a label. But let's say I would like to see what has happened since the initial revision and this one. And I will do a compare. That shows me in the document all the changes that have been made. And these changes are obviously the changes in status, but also the new work item that I've added. I can also do that on a work item level. So each of the individual work item. And this will help me to understand who has made changes, why they made those changes, etc. So it's really a part of revision control that you can do on these documents, keeping track of who's doing what. Now, as I said, you can baseline certain versions of the document and by that marking that label, or you could do that on a project level where I can actually go to the baselines and create a project baseline, which allows me to go back in time to the point where actually all the documents were, for example, signed and the product is released. Then you continue to go on to the next version of your project, and basically you would like to maybe have a moving back to this state to create any reporting if an auditor comes in. So let's say initial phase of project. So I'm going to create a project baseline, and later on we will see we can go back to that stage. Now we've created some work items, and these work items are actually now linked. I've already linked them to the individual standards. And we can see this by opening one of those work items. So let's say we open this work item, and we can see now the hierarchy in terms of linking. We can see it here, but you have to recognize the icons being a standard in this case and being a system test case in this case. If you don't know exactly, you can have a look here. You see there is a standard is compliant to. So basically this requirement is compliant to Article 11 of the engine and powertrain in the standard document, and it's verified by engage drive pilot while at rest. While at rest. So you see the way how things link together, and you can actually move around. So you can go on up to the individual work item. I could go down again, and I could go down to the test case. And if we have more work items in terms of work packages and software specifications, etc., they will also be there as well. So you see the whole traceability or the whole relationship. I will get back to that later on when we look a little bit further into traceability. We looked at the left side of the V model. Now, if we look to the workflow that we looked at into, then we saw that we took the document from the status draft in review without any conditions, without any restrictions, and no functions. Now, before we went to review, we first had to sign. So there's a condition already in there that we signed the document. Now, within the vModel template that's available within Polarion out of the box, you will have this workflow implemented, which means that once you have signed and you move then the document to reviewed, all the items in that document, being a system requirement type of document, are automatically moved from draft to reviewed as well. And that's a function that's automatically implemented into the example template. You could also turn it around. You could also say, well, actually, no, I would like to have a condition that I would like to manually first move all the work items in the document from draft to reviewed. And before, I cannot move the document to reviewed. Okay. The same applies if we go further. So if we go from review to approved, we go the same process. We first need to sign, or the people that are invited to approve the document need to approve it. And then when we move it to approved, all the work items in the document will be moved to approved. Okay. So that's a little bit on the workflows. What we're going to look at next is the right side of the view model, a little bit more on the quality assurance side. This part of the demo will concentrate on the test cases. So we look at the right side of the V model. We see a number of test cases. Each of them have their own link to the requirements. So when we look at the software requirements, we currently have two. There's several ways to create these test cases. One way is we already have a test case. So in this case, I already developed a test case called test the software tutorial. I can link it to the appropriate work item. So I could click on this and say this one verifies, go back to the other, and it should verify this tutorial. I can save it, and that basically creates an hierarchical relationship between the two. Another way of doing it is by simply selecting the work item and from there initiate a new test case. So I could say I will have software to check that the operation input voltage is between 12 and 12 volts and doesn't exceed 15 amperes with a variance of 10%. Now I can add a test case for that, saying create verifying software test case. And it already, in this case, which is something you can configure in your template, copies the title, puts test in front of it as the title. And I copy that to the description. I could add some test steps here if I wanted to and save that. So that's two ways of doing it. A third way is if I would have a set of test cases that I've imported from, let's say, a Excel spreadsheet. If I have an Excel spreadsheet like I have here, with already test cases defined, with some of them having some test steps, you can see that the number of test steps vary per test case, a description, a severity, a status, a type, etc. I could import that similar as I've imported the requirements from a Word document. I can import this also from an Excel spreadsheet, same with requirements as for test cases. After I've imported them, I would like to link them then to the individual requirements. Now I can do that in the same way I did this with this software test case by simply one-to-one link them, but that would be a lot of work. Now there are different mechanisms. For example, I could go to my work item view where I see all my work items in the list, and instead of selecting a table view, I go to what we call a matrix view. And in that matrix view, I will select a filter where I say on the rows, I would like to have the type system test case. And then on the columns, I would like to have the type being the system requirement. Now let's search for that. And that enables a view where I can actually see the relationship between each of the test cases. In this case, the system requirement test cases or system requirement test cases and the system requirements. And in this view, I can actually create changes. I could say, put this on verifies, and I can add links between test cases and requirements. So this way, I have a much better way of quickly seeing what are each of the items that need to be linked. I can link them together. There are more advanced ways of doing it. If you have information in your test case definition that already maps to an ID or some kind of mapping to your requirement, we can use some scripts to automatically restore the linking. So that's a quick way on linking. In this case, we actually have a set of requirements that are linked to a set of test cases. So within the requirements section, I could have a look at one of the reports. One of the coverage reports that shows me, well, let's discard this, that shows me, give me an overview, how many requirements, system requirements I have, and how many are linked actually to test cases. Now you can quickly see that I only have one uncovered, which is, let's say, somewhere here. There it is. A tutorial must be created for this purpose. There's no test case linked to that one. And then I have a number that actually are matched and covered. and some that are covered, however, with a failing test case. In this case, the test case has been ran and it failed. And that will be shown by an exclamation mark there on the coverage report. This is what we call a live report. And these live reports can be customized. So what I could do is I could go to the Expand Tools here, Edit, and then I have my framework in which I can actually configure every information that should be going into the fields. So here's a pie chart, and I can select any of these widgets, simply drag and drop them into a certain area, and then configure them to my needs. So those are the live reports we talked about in the earlier presentation, giving you the ability to visualize the information into the system. Now, let's go back to the homepage and let's start a little bit of testing. Let's have a look at the test cases. So as I already mentioned, we have our test cases, and those test cases are defined at a level, in this case, the system requirement level. So we have system test cases, but before we can run them, we actually have to select the test cases that we would like to run in what we call a test run. Because a test case can be ran multiple times. You could run that test case at the point where you do a regression test overnight. You could run that test case at the time when you release the software. So there are several moments where you might want to rerun the same test case. Therefore, we have test runs, and within those test runs, we can automatically or manually select the appropriate test cases that need to be run at a certain point in time. We have templates for that, where we can configure how to automatically select the appropriate test cases. Or we could say, let's create a new test run, and I select as a template empty, which means I manually need to select the test case I want to run. Let's say I call this test run 8, and I create the run. Now, it already explicitly asked me, you have to select the test case before you can actually start to run. So let's do that, select test cases, and I can then select a couple of test cases I would like to include in this test run. Now, let's save after 5, and let's go back to the test run, and that shows me there are 5 waiting test cases. I have not executed any of them. None have passed, none have failed, none have blocked. And now I can start to basically engage with the manual testing. In the way of automated testing, I read in the test results into Polarion, and it updates these figures automatically. So let's execute these tests, which is the next step. I've created my test run, and now I'm at the point where I want to execute those. So I start execute, and I start. And that basically allows me to go through each of the test steps. So a test case might have some test steps or not. If not, then it only has a test verdict. If it has steps, then it goes through each of the steps, and I can say, well, this one passed, that one passed. And as soon as I save, again, something that can be configured in the project template, it requires me to log in. So it requires me to log in and to basically provide that and validate that I'm the one that tested it. Now, the next one, the first step passed, but then it failed because the break did not engage. And there is a failure due to break not engaging. So the overall verdict is a fail. I save it again. Again, it asks me for my credentials. And I've done 2 of them. Now, let's stop here. I save this, I go back to my test run, and I look at the results. I have 1 failed, 1 passed, still 3 waiting, so 2 executed, and I can see in the bottom here the failing one. And what shows here is automatically, because that's the most important ones you want to look at, the ones that failing. I can also browse all the test run records, and they will give me all of them, including the passed one and the failed one. But in the case of the failing one, it also automatically has created a defect. The defect assigns or addresses the issue that occurs when the test case failed, and basically you can then go in and resolve that issue by either creating a change request, by either updating the requirement, or maybe it's a failure in the test case itself, the description. So you have to fix that one. Now, when we fix that, I can then basically remove or move the status of this issue all the way through to resolved and then retest it again. So you see the whole test run functionality or quality assurance functionality allows you to create test cases, to basically select them into test runs, execute those test runs, run through the tests, and also do some defect and issue handling. Once I've done that, I can go back again to my test case itself. So we have here a failing test case. If I look at the test case, I can see that in the test case, I actually had 2 test runs with each of them a different, let's say, result. Both failed, by the way, in this case, but you see that the test case itself could have multiple different results. Some failing, some passing. And this is also the information I could show in my traceability reports. Finally, in the test quality assurance part, we also have some reports. So we go to testing here. We see that we have, again, a requirement test case coverage report. We have a work package test case coverage report. So those are the coverage reports that I showed earlier. We also have a report called test run statistics. And this will give you an overview of the statistics of all the test runs that were run, in this case, within the last 6 months. And we see that we've ran 5, 3 are still open, 1 is in progress, 1 failed, and now we're not talking about individual test cases within the test run, but we're talking about the test run itself, the overall test case. And here we see again in those test runs the amount of tests executed, the number of passed, the number failed. So this page gives you an overview of all the tests that have been run within this project. In the last part of the demo, we're going to focus on the traceability. So a little bit more in the middle of the V model, and we're going to look at some of the reporting that shows the traceability, that shows the connection between the left and the right side of the V model, basically. We've now defined a set of test cases, a set of test runs, a set of system requirements. We also link them to some of the standard requirements, which I did earlier. We have some software requirements linked to them. We actually have some software test cases, some work packages, and some tasks. And if I want to see all that traceability in one dialog or in one diagram, I can do that. I could also limit it to certain levels if I wanted to only view certain levels within that diagram. But let's have a look at the reports that we have. So what I'm opening first is a multi-level traceability report. And this report shows me the standard requirements that I've marked as applicable within this project, including the system requirements that are linked to. So in this case, the article 11 from the standard requirements is linking to a number of system requirements. They have some system test cases again. Some of them have some, refining system requirements that are again having a test case. And in this case, also a software requirement that has a software test case plus a work package. And in the case I ran some of these tests, I can also see the test run results. So you see the ones that failed, the ones that passed, and this is really a traceability matrix that you can show at the point where an auditor comes in, or you can print this to PDF or export this to PDF and basically share it with whoever you want, or put it into your file archives. Now, there are different ways to look at this data. If I want to zoom in on a specific one, so let's say I want to zoom in on PD 570 and I would like to see the impact. There's another report called an impact analysis where I can simply type in the ID of the design of the item, and that shows me all the traceability down from PD 570, the original article coming from the standard as it is in the library, then to all of the individual system requirements, the test cases, the software requirements, the work packages, the test cases with a defect, all of that is shown in one diagram. So you can basically debug or look into specific areas of how do things link together. What's the impact if something changes? And here we can also see the coloring indicating the type of link roles. Now, if I open an item about impact, let's open this one. If I open an item and if I make changes to it, those changes could ripple through to the hierarchy, which means that if I make a change to this drive pilot must disengage, I would like to have someone who's responsible for the test case basically be informed that something has changed. And I can do that by making a change here. Let's say I create a command here and I save this, but I save it with the suspect. What that does, it indicates suspecting items on the test cases that are linked to it, and the people that are responsible for those items then get a message or can look at their My Polarion page where they can are triggered that something has changed to a linked item for, in this case, the test case they're responsible for. So based on the SNE, the person gets information that they need to pay attention and look into this item and see if this change to the parenting work item, in this case the parenting system requirement, has impact on this requirement. If so, make changes here again and save with suspect. If not, then edit this one, remove the suspect and save it again. Okay, so in that way we can inform people if things have changed throughout the hierarchy. As I already mentioned, those reports can easily be configured. So a multi-level traceability report or an impact analysis report is simply a matter of creating a new report, drag and drop some widgets into it and configuring them to your needs. Now, the last part I wanted to show is going a little bit more into the funnel or the lower level of the V model, where we look at the implementation. We've talked about requirements on the highest level. So when we look here, we talked about software requirements, system requirements, but then we have a level called work packages and tasks. Work packages are no requirements. They are actually the architecture. They're the implementation. So basically, this is where I describe how to implement it in several tasks. And I have created some examples in this project. So we look here, we do have some work packages that I've created. I have some tasks linked to it. And we could then use those. So we see them also in the multi-level traceability. They're all linked to the software requirement, system requirements, etc. And now I can start to do some planning. So what I could do is I could go to my release plans. I have in this case release 2. And within that release, I can select the work packages I would like to have included. And you see them here already. They're selected. In this case, I could do that manually or automatically. In this case, they're selected. And I can use a sort of Kanban method to move them through the workflow. So I can simply select them and say, okay, this is implemented. The resolution is, it's done. Save it. I can put in the amount of hours. I can save it and I can move it through the workflow. The same with the iterations. That allows me to do the same for the tasks underneath. So I could take a task and move it down the level in the process, and that sort of advances the status property of that specific work item. So that way I can actually plan my releases, my iterations, and finally do some testing that I've sort of linked to the releases. So I have a number of tests and test runs that I have, I can line up and I can see what the status is, how many work packages are done, how many meet my acceptance criteria, etc. So that allows me to actually go into the more implementation side of the process. Now, we also looked at some reporting. We looked at the system requirement. As I already mentioned, I have created some software requirements as well. So within the design, I can see the software requirements. I've created 2 software requirements. I've created 2 test cases. I've also created, in the meanwhile, there's a software requirement coverage where I can see how many of these software requirements actually are linked to system requirements. Now, I would like to go 1 minute back. Let's say we have released the software, we've done some changes to our project, and now an auditor comes in. So I would like to show the status at the point where the software has been released. Therefore, I created in the beginning a baseline. So now if I go back to that baseline and I would look again to the same software requirement, there's nothing there. And also, if I look to the system requirement, software requirement, the software requirements are missing. So basically, this will show me at the point where I created that snapshot, which was in the beginning, or that baseline, the status. The same is for all the reporting. So also the multi-level traceability report shows me this at the point where I basically created this this baseline. That allows me to always create reporting at the point where I basically have created this baseline, and I can always move back to that point in time. In this last part of the demo, we basically looked at the traceability, and with that we concluded the demo. So we looked at all down from the standard requirement into the system requirement, going into the software requirement, work package, and tasks. We looked at implementing that into a set of release and iterations. We also looked at test cases on the right side, a system test case linked to a system requirement, a software test case linked to a software requirement, and how these test cases could be included into test runs and basically automatically triggering issues if things fail. If there's any questions, please let us know and contact us. Thank you for your time.